Hi, my name's Jared. I'm from Australia. I just want to firstly thank you for doing everything that you do, and of course to coming to Israel to speak to us exclusively about the Zeitgeist Movement and everything else. I've been following the Zeitgeist Movement since the middle of 2011, and since I first came across the Zeitgeist documentary series, it's completely changed my life for the better. And again, thank you so much. My question is, if you are or not, whether you're pondering a visit to Australia before the release of the film.
Is this working? Test? Test, test, test? Test? I'll use this. Did you want to translate what he asked?
That's okay.
Test, 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 test. Australia, I would love to come to Australia. I was supposed to go 2 years ago and something happened and I couldn't make it. There was some organizers there in the movement. I have no intention to, but anything could happen. But that's all I can, that's it, I have no idea. I'm going to be very busy working on the film though, so it's going to be probably difficult for me to do much traveling. But if the movement there was able to arrange something that made like a larger event, that would be interesting to get going, just as everyone did here. You know, as opposed to just say like a film screening or something like that. I'd be certainly intrigued to do that since I've never been. So maybe you guys can arrange something, contact me.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
אני חושב שאין צורך כל כך לתרגם את התשובה הזאת, כי היא התייחסה למתי פיטר מתכוון לבוא לאוסטרליה. אז נמשיך הלאה עם השאלות. הוא אמר שהוא יבוא כשיארגנו אירוע רציני באוסטרליה, כמו שעשו פה. כל הכבוד למה שארגן פה.
Hi.
Hi.
In your second movie, you presented the Venus Project as the solution to all the issues and problems you presented here. And I wanted you to speak about the split. And why did you stop being the activist arm of the Venus Project?
Well, actually, we never stopped being the activist arm of the Venus Project. The Venus Project made a decision that their direction wasn't being represented. And as far as the solutions you speak of, the Venus Project is a representation of a body of ideas that present solutions that existed prior. So if you really think about what we're doing here, we're talking about a train of thought. Train of thought is irrespective of any institution. It has to do with logic and reason. A grave failure that was made early on in my work here was to relegate all association of solution to one man and to one institution. And I regret having done that because it actually did a disservice to the community as a whole, because it did not let them think. It didn't let them understand what it means to apply science, to actually take a critical view. And I'm not putting down any institution, by the way, or anyone that works at the Venus Project, absolutely not. But it's not about an institution. So I did nothing to become not the activist arm. That was their decision. All I did was promote the train of thought. And that's what I continue to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
בגדול מה שפיטר אמר. מה? וואו, איזה מדהים.
Wow, he's a fast typer.
2012.
Hi. What I would like to know is, you spoke in the last part, it was relatively short, and the first 3 parts were more analyzing the past. I'm more interested in how the future can look. So, in that regard, you said that if change will come, it will come from the 99% from the citizens, not from the people who are controlling.
Right.
So, what I want to know is, how would this change manifest, in your opinion, and how would we prevent a situation where, again, 1% would rise and take control of it? How would this intrinsically be different to prevent that from happening?
Have you seen other talks I've given? Have you seen other things that I've done?
I've seen the movies only.
Okay, one thing that I wanted to do with this, because the subject was different, well, basically, since the subject was different, I didn't want to go through the entire expanse of things I've talked about before in other lectures, especially that were in like the films, which is why I ended it in that way, because I can't possibly spend that much time. It'd be another hour of me discussing such issues. That being said, the solution, you know, there is a very powerful train of thought that can compose the solution. The transition to that solution, again, that's for a larger conversation, what it means to apply what we understand to social origination and to human affairs. The transition to anything new is going to be very complicated and very tense because, as history has shown, any move to any new social idea, and the broader, the more it's fought, is met with a great deal of both public and establishment, how to put it nicely, offense, I suppose. So while the 99%, forget that language. I use that just because it's being popularized right now. But the people coming together because their betterment is at stake, because they're literally at risk on multiple levels, from the problems of war and all the things I could list, the environmental problems, these extreme inequality and equity. It's going to motivate people in some way. And I consider this system failing. I think it's going to continue to fail from a few different angles. And hopefully that pressure will get people to want to educate themselves. And that education, when you think about a social system, if properly referenced, always gravitates back, or it should gravitate back to the basic principles of what the Zeitgeist Movement advocates as far as a new social system. How to get there? Everyone loves to ask me that. And I'm sorry to say I can't give you a straight answer because it's very difficult. I could ramble on for probably 20 minutes about ideas, but I don't want to waste everybody's time. One thing that I'm trying to put forward, which I hope to start within, I don't know, hopefully by mid this year, if not towards the end, is something called the Global Redesign Institute. And what it is an interface that, in a public sense, everyone can interact with. It's digital, it's online. And it's an overlay system where people can redesign society in a very physical way. It's like a virtual way of redesigning the infrastructure or redesigning the energy resources and allocations. You take known principles of engineering and you apply them. And you create, for lack of a better expression, a Wikipedia type of affair where everyone is contributing, sourcing, and making this model virtually. And as the inefficiencies of this system grow, I think people are going to be desperate to know what's next, what they can do to make their lives better, especially countries that are really suffering with heavy unemployment, with heavy energy prices. And someone might show them, this is a blueprint for your region, it's the global redesign. And they might say, this is amazing. We need money, and now we do it, but if we didn't have money, we could just do it. And I think that logic of just doing it will eventually prevail. And you'll eventually, hopefully, have some country or some subset of a country that's willing to dedicate their resources and labor to make the first stages of what an efficient society may be. And then from there it catches on. And all the establishments slowly, they lose their power because they don't work and people see a new alternative. They don't want to submit to the nonsense that they've been doing, for the past 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years. They see it, they finally see it, and it's hard. It's hard to say when that could happen or how. But I will just reiterate that the failures of this system will be catalytic. So, does that help?
Yeah, that
I wish
helps.
I could give you a more straightforward answer, but
That helps.
It's very complicated. It's all about awareness. So, if there's anything I encourage anybody to do, it's not only spread this information, but also think creatively too. Think about what you would do if you had, like in my film, Project Earth, the third section. It's all about thinking about what if you had a planet, how would you construct it? What would the logical basis of a new planetary system be? And you begin to work from that core logical level, and then it starts to self-form if you think about it's the scientific basis of our existence.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Hey, good evening.
Hi.
So with the economic, social, ecologic paradigm the way it is today, it almost seems I've watched I've watched all your movies. I really enjoyed this lecture.
Thanks.
But it almost seems utopic to a point of how am I myself when I need to go earn my living? I want to open my own business to provide for myself. If I specifically being in Israel, being Israeli Jews, feeling all this, we may call it anti-Semitism or whatever it may be towards us, it almost feels like all these ideas are almost utopic and not really tangible in the real world. And this is my question. On a personal note, since I've been aware of most of these things, it's just really, really, really depressing.
Right.
It's like why would I want to put my money in the bank? Why would I want to, buy clothes? Why would I want to do anything? Because we're heading towards the end of it all. So my question would be, on a day-to-day way of living, what is it that you think that we could each do, besides awareness, besides coming to this, that we could do to bring the change?
That's another great question I get asked a lot, and I could probably give you some very overly simplified answers regarding where you would put your energy into, like what fields you work in. For example, I would recommend if you're young enough and you're still dealing with the early educational stages, don't go into advertising or things that I had to do, I fell into. Go into something that actually does something tangible, first of all. Go into programming or structural engineering or something that has a direct return to society that literally produces something. Beyond that, it becomes, because what we speak of is such a broad view, it's inherently broad, for me to give you solutions within the system is almost counterproductive. Like could you give me an example of what you think you could do off the top of your head, given the context of what we speak of?
Well, the problem is that I find myself looking for these answers, but I always, like you said, find myself falling back into...
As an individual, there's really not that much you can do. It's when the power comes together in certain ways that has some type of larger effect on the social system. For example, you could have a hybrid system emerge eventually where you have certain attributes of what you call the resource-based economy or resource-based economic model. Certain attributes are there that are using maximized technological efficiency to better the world's people, still within the market system to a certain degree. And that's a great hope. Where countries that have mass poverty, they finally stop relying on the United Nations and World Bank loans, and they start to build their own technological structures that are very advanced, like with vertical farmings, for example, and they just do it themselves, and they feed. They don't engage in commerce. They just feed everybody with the technical means. It could be done, and I'd love to see a country finally wake up to do that. But unfortunately, it's without the paradigm of thought. Those things are great if you think about it, if they could happen. That would be amazing. If even in Israel, I don't think your unemployment's not that bad. I'm not sure if your poverty doesn't seem to be that bad either. Is it? I'm not quite sure.
5%.
5%. So as opposed to of course Palestine and Gaza, which have
5. That's what I read. I read it was 5%. Don't kill. No. Okay. I'm sorry.
Let's assume, for example, that all of the. Let's assume, for example, that all of the current state of affairs. Well, let's take Africa as a great point. Africa has been systematically abused for a good 150 years by imperial powers, and it has one of the most resource-rich landmass. It's one of the most resource-rich land masses in the world. Yet it's one of the poorest. It should be the wealthiest, considering what it has. If somebody was able to get enough ingenuity together and get enough support to build initial structures that would provide for the people, it would be absolutely incredible to see the chain reaction that would emerge with other states.
Does that not bring us back to governments controlling people?
It somehow, regardless of whether you call it government as we know it today or a new form of government, it has to come from some type of larger order construction. And as much as people are afraid of government, as much as people are terrified of, obviously, I'm not a fan of the state, but the state doesn't have to be the way it is. It's the way the state is materialized within the market economy that has formed the extreme biases and propensities that the state has. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a total view. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't have consideration of the largest order entity. Doesn't mean the world as a whole shouldn't have people literally thinking about how it's working, technically. Yeah. Not the control of people, but the control of how to take care of the people in an appropriate scientific way. And again, unfortunately, this is a tangent, obviously, but unfortunately, all the values are against that because social stability is antithesis of the market economy. It's antithesis of the state institution. It doesn't benefit to have steady state economies or to have peace. So that aside, there's so many things moving against what we talk about that I always come back to the same thing: global mass movement. Global mass movement with a massive pressure that emerges, where the powers that be step back and realize that they're losing broad control, and they can no longer even depend on each other to requalify themselves in their state identification.
I understand. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Hi. First of all, I would like to thank you, another person that thanks you personally for a change that you did in my life and the movies you created, and obviously all the things that followed. It really meant a lot to me, so thank you.
Thank you.
And the second thing is, I heard you mention or say a couple of times, I'm not sure exactly what you meant, but I think it was on the Joe Rogan show, that you talked about communes and you don't support the establishment of scientific, communes under the values that you speak about.
Well, no, not exactly. I think in the context, which is a common one, I don't see it as a solution in and of itself. And I see it possibly as semi-dangerous, especially if you were to get a commune of sorts that really was doing well while the remaining regions started to suffer. If the commune wasn't willing to open its doors entirely and to continue to expand and absorb everybody, you'd probably end up with violence. You'd probably end up with combatant type of environments. And considering that everything is based on scarcity in this system, so if you do have a commune such as the kibbutz, for example, which is similar in that sort of vein, that's isolated, but it's still supported by money. But even though internally it doesn't have those mechanisms of trade as absurd as we see, of course, in the general world. But is that a solution? Does that present? If you want to have a high-tech commune, first of all, you have to have an enormous amount of money. But we're talking using in the market system, the type of technology that would facilitate the things that we speak of in the movement. In the market system, they'll be extraordinarily expensive. Doesn't mean they're really expensive. It means that all the processes that go through investment, the culmination, the restructuring of industry, the usage of land, property, all
I'm talking about if people with skills, like engineers, like Jacques Fresco and people like that, botanists and I know people with technological skills would get together and start communes that could support.
If they have the money to do it, that could obviously, back to the Venus Project, a great concept, which is really what builds the logic out as far as things catching on. Jacques Fresco always talked about having circular city systems that in one country would pick up, and then hopefully the trend would emerge. And other people would pick up, it doesn't have to be circular either, it could be any kind of city system. And that the efficiency of that system would become so attractive that others would want to do it. So in that sense, that's kind of what you're speaking of. So you could have advanced scientists design these things. But again, the amount of money...
Not like super circular cities, but something ordinary and
Well, there are plenty, like Oroville, there are plenty of communities out there, I wouldn't call them necessarily communes, but communities that operate with their own infrastructure and their own very different way of living that already exists, if you're not familiar with those. Yeah, there are a lot of those out there, but they, I say it's great. I don't put it down, but I don't see it as a solution. Unless it's exemplifying the technology to show the world what's possible, you're running in place. You're not really doing anything.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma.
Can we ask a question from the people in the world that are watching us?
אני רוצה קודם. Okay. You outlined in your lecture a history, an ongoing history of basically the 99% being perpetually lied to and being manipulated to make irrational life choices that are destructive to them and not in their interests.
Yes,
and this reminded me very much of the 18th, 19th century Enlightenment movement. And the lesson of the 20th century is that the Enlightenment movement failed, and facing different economical and other crisis situations, the majority of the 99% went to support various regimes of despotism and totalitarianism. And also my own experience as an activist is that when you tell someone he's being lied to, and that when he was fighting this war, which was the most intense phase in his life, he was basically being tricked. I'm rejecting him. He's not likely to join my cause. And my question to you is, do you think in the 21st century the circumstances are different and that it is now possible to simply present the facts or the rationality of the vision of Zeitgeist and be able to mobilize a majority of supporters?
Well, I can't say definitively that a yes or no, but what I do recognize are the patterns of cultural change. When you look back at the history of slavery, you look back at all of these powerful phenomena, which I'm sure back then people said, oh, we could never change this because they were so ingrained. Yet we do see amazing broad liberation. We came from massive racial biases and the like to kind of a basic understanding of equality. Science has illuminated a lot of basic truths that were not available to us before. Really serious superstitious bias have more or less subsided to a certain degree. There's still conflict, but in the broad scheme, very few governments, for example, are still controlled by or they are theocratic. There's a few lingering ones. There is change happening. There is change happening. The pattern of change is hard to diagnose. One thing I do think is that the equality notion is one of the most powerful. So we've gone again from racism and slavery to the liberation of women's rights. And I think the next stage, this liberation of society, is class equalization. Classism is really racism in a different form. And I think that eventually the economic necessity, meeting the needs of the human population, will no longer seem like some affair that's a privilege, to get your right to life, to have to work. It will become a normal part of reality. You're born into this world. You're taken care of by the system that you contribute to that takes care of everybody. I think this logic will prevail because it seems natural to me. So to answer your question, I do have faith. I have no idea how long it would take. You look around, you bang your head against so much. As I went along tirade about patriotism and nationalism, those things are still very prevalent, and in all its xenophobic and utterly biased and separatist and horribly ignorant positions, leading to massive amounts of atrocity on a daily basis, if you think about it. How do we overcome that? Slow process. Why give talks like this? But it can accelerate. There's a study that was done, I can't remember what the percentage was, but it said that once a certain idea reaches a certain percentage of the population as an acceptance, it accelerates very rapidly. It's basic analysis. I can't remember what it was. I want to say it was made... The tipping point? I don't remember it being called the tipping point. But no, not the 100 monkey. That's a little bit different. But this was actually a recent study that was done that analyzed social change. At any rate, all those factors combined, we see great change in the world. We've historically seen great change. With the incredible increase of information technology and understanding of the world around us, understanding of what we can do, I think, as many people here know, how do we justify supporting wars with all the destructive power that could easily be turned around to take care of everybody? We all know that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on an economic level doesn't have to exist. There's plenty of land to go around for all the population that are here. There's plenty of resources that can be brought in to create equality amongst all the people. But it's this baggage that exists for whatever purpose on whatever level that holds it back. And I think eventually it will be overcome. But I can't answer that question. I don't know. I often joke that maybe we're not designed to move forward. Maybe we'll just be an evolutionary cul-de-sac. The big question is, are we as a civilization programmed, if you will? Do we have enough intelligence and ability to adapt to create a truly sustainable society? That's the big question. Do we? Are we able to do that? Are we compatible with true technical sustainability as a species? We can talk about it. We can do it. I think so. I think so.
If you talk too much, you should do something about it.
So thank you for your question. Sure.
Hi.
Hello.
I have a question about the world government.
מתנצל, פשוט יש שאלה אנשים גם צופים בזה באינטרנט בזמן שאנחנו יושבים פה, ויש איזושהי שאלה, כמו שהבנתי?
Yeah, we had a question from the back, from the guys here.
Okay.
One of them asked interfere in your progress with that knowledge and spreading it?
As of now, nothing that I'm aware of. Nothing that I'm aware of. I think if you track the history of political dissonance, if you want to call it that, there's a long process of categorization and analysis of such figures. When they finally release, say, the huge CIA, FBI records on Martin Luther King or John Lennon, I don't think about such things. As far as I'm concerned, I don't care. And since the movement is seen in many ways as probably far too idealistic in its broad view, it's probably looked upon with great cynicism by those that are investigating subversive groups or whatever, that I have a feeling that we can go really, really far before these guys really catch on.
Somebody's blacklist like CIA or whatever.
I don't care. I mean, go ahead. I mean, it doesn't change anything. It's like, what can you? The difference with what the movement does is it's so broad, and it doesn't have loyalties that are traditional of what people would define as terrorist or what people define as subversive in all the definitions that you've seen historically. It transcends all of that. And there's a great faith in that because it's so broad. It's epically radical. And I think there's a certain safeguard with that, at least for the time being. So.
Godspeed.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, it seems that Ilian sort of asked my question, but it gets me to another one. It seems that the people in power right now, they have most of the resources now, and even I, as a part of the global movement of trying to change things and create an alternative situation, we don't always have the means to do that, and we find ourselves struggling to do it, just like you said it. And I'm wondering how the Zeitgeist Movement is supporting the initiatives in parts of the world.
Well, with events like this, I mean, knowledge is really power in the sense of what will facilitate this type of movement and its transition into something new. And it's only when everyone becomes as educated as I try to be, and that's, by the way, what defines a true democratic presence, by the way. People often talk about democracy and equality. If you're not willing to be educated, if you're not willing to take the time, then you're by your own fault becoming, on all odds, subservient to somebody else. That's what the whole basis of the governance and subjugation in feudalism is all about, keeping them illiterate. So it's all about understanding, and that's how we can materialize this. But as far as real projects, as I mentioned earlier, like the Global Redesign Institute, we have all these event days. I'm constantly trying to find ways, because I don't have any real monetary support, so I'm constantly trying to find ways that are community-oriented, that don't cost anyone money, that can bring people together and have an effect. And we'll probably end up engine into some type of general kind of protest action, but usually merging with others to try and bring more people into us. Never just the Zeitgeist Movement protest. That's not really what is going to materialize this. It's going to be thinkers that materialize this. And again, back to the Global Redesign Institute, imagine if you had a small group of technically oriented people with a firm grasp of this foundation in pockets in every single country in the world. And they're slowly beginning to work together, and they slowly begin to create their own institution. And I've talked about this as what I call a parallel government system. And that's more or less in gesture, because obviously they're not in governance of anything except their own ideas. But if they could present themselves in such a way to show how we could change and feed everything, create world peace, no one has to worry about the nonsense, no debt, and really get that information across to the rest of the masses, then I think the turning point is just a matter of time, especially given the failure of this system as it continues.
Even if it takes money to get it done?
Well, obviously you can't do anything without money. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go out there and be exploitative and raise money for erroneous purposes. I don't raise any money for the movement. It's something that at this point I think would work against it. And we don't really have those type of projects that enable it. And I could go on a long treatment of how I operate like that. But the gesture of it is really to get people's energy and time, and to get them to not want to have the value of being supported by money, because that's a critical value, because we're so distorted by that. I mean, so many people I meet, they're like, well, I could work in the movement, but I need to make money, so they spend all their time making money, which I understand. But you've got to start to divide your life up, especially if you have kids. I mean, the future is in a great precarious state. And I just wish people could kind of see that and balance their life, not get too extreme. It also frightens me when I meet people that are way extreme with this, and they're way too gung-ho, and they think that, I met people when the Occupy movement blew up in a positive way, that they thought this was it. This was the transition. They were like, this is it, we're doing it. And I was, whoa, back up. There's no plans. They have nothing to really contribute creatively. It's a great angst expression, and it worked very well on a certain level on that awareness, since it was global. But back to my point, it's up to all of us that are thinking about these ideas to work together in a way. That's what the movement tries to facilitate through all the events. So I'm hoping that other people will enlighten me as to what other new projects can help create this.
Getting back to community and love, that's all we need. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. I'd like to ask a question which I think I've been asking myself for 2 years now, regarding the Zeitgeist Movement. And I used to be a Zeitgeist Movement activist. This is how I started being an activist. This is how I woke up. And in the beginning, it was all about how we could spread the ideas of the movement through the movement's logo, website, movie, etc. And ever since, I've gone through a personal revolution where I started working as a network activist, trying to connect between people having great ideas. And I meet many times that people have a difficulty seeing themselves as activists outside of organizations. So how, and this is like a question not for a philosophical answer, but personally, how do you see your role in connecting people that make change on a spiritual level, on a ecological level, and awareness level together? Because I think the Zeitgeist Movement has a lot of power to move these kind of ideas into a role. So.
Well, so I don't want to have to repeat myself, because it's very similar in its questions of the two questions that were prior. Let me ask you. I just want to hear your idea. How would you answer your own question? I'm curious to know.
All right, I'll tell you something, because this is something I've been waiting for a long time. Zeitgeist Addendum ends with solutions you could have, and I think that moving forward as well.
Right.
To have a particular notion inside the movement that talks about connecting between organizations and talks about how ideas are unrelated to a particular organization.
Right.
And I feel that it's among the wisdom that comes through, but it's not particularly said. I would like to have, I don't know, because have you ever heard about Paul Hawken?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this kind of idea, the way that spreading basically the solution that is about to save us, as he says, immune system of the earth, is people waking up all over the earth, not just agents for this movement. And it's really important for me to hear that literally spoken.
Right.
And, that takes nothing away from all the work that's being done, and thank you, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I mean, the institutional work of the movement and its attempts to bridge communities with other institutions is, of course, important, but only to the effect that hopefully the other communities will really understand what we're talking about, because it's unfortunate with all the activists that I meet that engage in other institutions, that identify with those institutions, which also becomes counterproductive, by the way. They become too ingrained in what they're representing. And I see that in the Zeitgeist Movement as well. It's almost a fallback. It's bad to have too much identification with a group association and an identity brand. That's dangerous. I'd rather see people associate with just the train of thought. So that's critical to me, but that's really advanced. People have a general tendency, and they're reinforced to have labels and to want to block themselves in. They say, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, or they say, I'm of this religious faith, or I'm liberal. They qualify, hence that's a flaw of our language too, but they qualify themselves, and that's inherently boxing, whether they know it or not.
Well, this is the most advanced movement for social change, basically, that I know, and I think we can allow ourselves to talk about advanced ideas. But anyway, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Avi? Okay. Yoel? מי אתה? כן. אבי? יואל.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Yoel. Okay. My question is, I live in Sdot Yam, which is a kibbutz, which you mentioned before. Kind of similar to what you see in the Venus Project, but without scientists and with worse architecture and worse interior design. Anyway, my question is, on a kibbutz, one of the big problems is that people don't really have a motivation to produce, to contribute, to create, because there's no money being exchanged. And I've heard in the movies you discuss this kind of issue a little bit about what the motivation would be in such a resource economy based society.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what would be the motivation. I mean, if there's not a carrot and there's not a stick, what is the motivation?
Those that describe circumstances to me where people are unmotivated in this system, but yet they happen to exist in sort of systems that are based on reciprocal trade in a communal environment, it's required to do that. And they often say that, well, these tendencies of creativity don't seem to persist. And I have to remind them that regardless of if you're in that environment, you still have all of the supporting features of the environment, of the market system, and all of its engines around you, which are definitely inhibiting. So if you're grown up in a general environment where you're witnessing all the wealth and everything else, and you're witnessing all the power of money, even if you're isolating yourself in a smaller group that isn't using money, you're still very much affected psychologically. To answer your question, I think it comes down to really how people are educated. It really comes down to the way people are educated and the sense of freedom that they're given at the youngest age. All the people I've met that have a tremendous creative drive had a very, very different upbringing and a very, very different life experience than those that were more or less victims of, say, a lower middle class household or a poverty-stricken household, were forced to work at a very young age. They had this instilled ethic that their right of existence and definition was based on their labor contribution in a very mechanical sense. And their family values will carry that forward. As opposed to a lot of people I've met that had very creative, free environments. They didn't have heavy pressures, and they do amazing work in creative fields. Not only creative in the sense of typical art forms like music or something that would be considered recreational, but engineers that are constantly thinking about solutions and that are constantly, they get off on the idea of problem solving and things that we don't usually think about or that we think would be mundane to us that have grown up. Because I grew up in a drudgery-based environment too. I can see that sense in myself. I do so much without any pecuniary reaction, any monetary gain now, which amazes me because I grew up in the exact same environment that instilled a motivation through money. And I changed. I do almost 99% of the stuff I do now is no monetary gain and heavy monetary expense. So it comes down to the way people orient themselves. And I think the solution lies at the earliest form of education. And there could be ways of analyzing that, as I point out moving forward. I think that the drudgery of the labor system where you're submitting to a job that you don't particularly like, which is the majority, what does that say about your sense of self-worth? How does that motivate you any farther? If you're going to a job in your little dictatorship from 9 to 5, and you come out, what do you expect from people in this kind of like, in this expression of angst and then alcoholism and drug addiction and sitting there playing video games 40 hours a day when you're not working? There's a laziness that's inherent to the system, I believe. And if you look at children, there's no inherent laziness. People don't have to be paid to do things that they like to do. So there's a big spectrum. It's not easy to answer because we're working within this sort of general cultural dynamic, so it's hard to see outside of it. We haven't been able to see those grand experiments commence yet, but we see the pockets of them. And I think creative drives are inherent to us. We do get up and move around without money. I will walk across the stage. I will wake up in the morning and stand up without money. And you can extrapolate that to what it means to do anything and what the motivation really relies. Otherwise, if you really take that train of thought home, it would be like people would just literally never move if they didn't have fiscal support. A lot of people don't. Well, I know. In a certain sense, they don't. But it's really a cultural neuroses. It's really a cultural neuroses. Because again, 99% of human history did not have money. 99% of human hunter-gatherers, they did lots of stuff, probably in a very powerful way, very, very enduring way, that did not require that type of reward. It might have been survival-based in a very straightforward way, but there's a lot of evidence to show that the sustenance of life was met quite quickly in those environments, given the ones that still exist today in very small pockets. And they have tremendous cultural little nuances and and contributions and subtle inventions that they deal with, like the piaha in Amazon, in the Amazon, and a few other examples that are still remnants. Unfortunately, most of them have been gone by globalization and industrialization. But so I think there are a great deal of examples that support, if the environment enables it, then people will be very creative and push forward without that need of that stick and carrot. I also want to recommend a book called Drive, maybe you've heard of it, which is a book that was written by Daniel Pink that investigates what it means to be creative versus what it means to be mechanical. And what he found through tremendous study, all sorts of research that was done in this, is that people are not monetarily driven in a creative sense, but they're monetarily driven when it comes to monotony. So if you're working on an assembly line at a restaurant, yeah, you probably have to be paid for that because there's nothing rewarding. It's not creative. But if you are given a creative option, which whatever the field may be, people transcend that interest in money. They get obsessed with the creative venture. And it was found that those that engage in creative interests, money actually had a negative effect on their behavior, as opposed to a positive one. So there's a lot of stuff out there. Check it out.
Okay.
Thank you.
ערן, יש פה? לא. טוב, שאלה אחרונה. נראה למענו. מוטי?
אדם. אני רשום. I was just, before asking, I have a big question, but I will not ask it because I want to let the other person ask, which was before me. I feel really uncomfortable to say that because we're coming here to work together and I don't want to protest to get anything.
Please do.
But yeah, I will. It felt really uncomfortable for me that there were only men today speaking. And only men, yeah. I'm sorry, if you were the one who were supposed to ask question, I would not steal the microphone from you. But yeah, I think for movement to trying to build itself, it says a lot. I mean, the platform that we work on may be really problematic if women cannot feel comfortable to speak here.
Well,
I will not speak for you. I'm a man, but yeah.
Hello. I want to just say one thing. This whole event was produced by women. Thank you. Mostly by Adi Florentin, sitting there.
We didn't choose the speakers based on that. That's.
I understand the sort of political correctness that you speak of in general. In fact, I had someone accuse me, when I did my third film, I just went where the information was. It didn't matter who they were. And someone said, "Why are there only white people interviewed in your movie?" It really struck me. I was like, "Wait, what?" And I mean, it was ridiculous in its general premise. But I understand the rationale because there are people in culture that have that baggage, that they have that feeling of oppression that has happened for whatever purpose, whether it's female oppression, whether it's race oppression. I understand that. And I try to be conscious of that ever since it's been brought up to me. But it doesn't mean when it comes to information that you should just make sure you have a woman there just for the sense of PR. I would love to see more women do a lot of different things with respect to the movement. Well, if anyone here would like to speak, any woman here would like to speak, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I'm going to have to apologize, but we really need to clear this stadium in about 5 minutes.
Oh.
So we would love to stay and have like long Q&A for hours, but we simply can't.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, I saw that in Zeitgeist there is a certain kind of community that's going to happen, like peaceful and everything. But I didn't understand your question for what will happen if a bad society or bad something will try to take over of this good, peaceful community.
Oh, the question I was asked earlier, you're right, I didn't answer that one, about what would happen if somebody tried to take over the
I want
system?
to make sure that I understand the question.
Okay, well, if you look at if you have a system that's based on self-interest and based on kind of a cutthroat competition that we have today, as I exemplified throughout this piece, how we have that competitive notion, that ruthless corporatism slowly had emerged and manifested into the state entity as we have today, which is literally now a corporate institution. At least the empires are for the most part.
Because it's more powerful.
What's that?
Because it's more powerful.
Well, because that's what the system is. The system is based on a general imbalance that has to persist for the economy to unfold, meaning you can't have equality. Economies don't only work based on inefficiency, and this is a very large subject. Basically, the competitive model of economics demands that everyone's fighting amongst themselves. If you don't have a system based on that, if you have a system that's not based on reinforcing the need to always look after yourself, doesn't matter what happens to everybody else, then you will see a completely different state of behavior, what you would call egalitarian behavior, which again...
Because they're a slave, so they need you alive. Maybe.
Well, if you have a system that the structure is based on actually caring for the human population, and the public recognize that, and there's no need, and there's no reward for corruption. There's a huge thing. There's so much reward in this system for people taking advantage of others that why should we expect anything less? If you put into place a system that is based on the best public health, and everyone knows it, and they're educated enough, even if corruption did emerge, no one would tolerate it. Today, we tolerate every level of corruption. Why? Because we rationalize it, and it's been with us for so long that we don't even really consider it that important in a certain sense. We accept this abuse because we also abuse others too. So there's a self-generating reinforcement that's constantly happening in a new system that doesn't have those values, that doesn't have any reward for the distortion of good values, if you will, good, then they won't materialize.
I want to say thank you for Peter for making this, and I want to say thank you for everybody that made this to come for real. And I want to invite everybody that helped to make it into reality to come to the stage so people can meet all of you. Doreen, the translator, come here. Come here. Moshe, everybody just go, come.
How you did that. That's amazing.